And I believe we are now live. So, hello, everybody. We're back to talk about Assassin's Quest as well as the Farseer Trilogy in general. And so, back here on the live show, I have Alex from Tall Guy Reads. So, hello, Alex.
Hello, everyone.
And of course, we have Jimmy from Jimmy Nuts
Good to see you.
and Derry from Derry's Read It Before. So our two veterans, and of
Hi.
course, Alex and I are new to the series. Hello, everybody.
I am definitely not a veteran compared to Derry, but I will accept this honorary title for the stream.
Yay. So, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to start spoiler free at first. And by the way, Theo from Rekindled Reader will also be joining us in this live stream. I was just talking before we went live about how I didn't start at the beginning of the year. It seemed like there was a wave of people starting the Realm of the Elderlings and Farseer, and I missed that wave. But I just started at my own time, and with Robin Hobb, there's always a wave going on. So I hopped onto my own wave and found Alex on it as well as Theo. So it was kind of fun to find people along the way. And of course, Derry is just happy to meet anybody anywhere in their journey as his enemy. So yay, we're all here. And so let's go ahead and talk spoiler free about the Farseer trilogy in general. Some general thoughts about this trilogy, who you'd recommend it to, why you should read it, kind of thing. And we'll start off with Alex.
Yeah, so I mean, I finished Assassin's Quest about 2 weeks ago, and overall, I absolutely love this trilogy. It kind of came out of nowhere because this is one that's been sitting on my TBR for years, and then once I started my booktube channel, I was like, all right, this is going to be the first trilogy that has been sitting here for a while that I'm actually going to start and see what it's all about. And honestly, I went in with the mindset of it's going to be kind of classic fantasy, traditional fantasy, derivative, or that's just what the idea I got from a lot of the non-spoiler videos I've seen to that point. And it was surprisingly not like that at all. It was very character focused, and I don't know. It was just extremely different than anything I was reading at the time, and is extremely different than anything I've read in a while. And I really enjoyed it, and I would say everyone should try it. But I think especially if you know you love really good character focused worlds and character focused narratives, with like really interesting magic system that you don't get all the answers fed to you. You kind of have to like discover them for yourself as you go along the way. I think this would be a fantastic series to start. And I know one person, like, I posted a video today and someone commented, should I start with Liveship or Farseer? And I haven't read Liveship yet, but I would say from my point of view, I think this was an excellent place to start, just because it's publication order, but two, I just think it was a really good, introduction to the world and just Robin Hobb's writing style and her character development and a lot of the strengths of that. So it got me really excited to read on in the series. That's for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, I just would echo all of those points. I think something I've talked before several times, and I'll just say it again. I don't mind being redundant about this, but Robin Hobb's approach to first-person narration is some of the best I've ever seen or I've ever read from. And I haven't read a ton of books, I guess, in first-person narration, but I've noticed that from the ones that I've read so far, I've always had to go through a bit of an adjustment period with it. And with her, I just felt like it happened so naturally, but also her development of secondary and even tertiary characters in third person was so well done. I think that's very hard to do. And I think something about her character work is that I actually always credit Abercrombie and Before They Are Hanged for being the book that turned me into a character driven reader in a sense, or be more into that format. But I think this trilogy would have done that for me too, had I discovered that first as well. Because I think Hobb not only develops really incredible characters, but just the complexity of the relationships between them is so rich. And so we're going to get into that, of course, when we talk spoilers. But also, I think the one thing that Robin Hobb does that I think would be wonderful for any reader at any stage of fantasy is that I feel like she has a way of making you really understand where characters are coming from. So she really pulls on your empathy as a reader, and you always know every moment what is motivating a character. So I feel like she builds very clear character motivations. It's all there. So I'm just very impressed with the way she does that. And so I'd love to hear from Jimmy and Derry. So Jimmy, we'll start with you. How do you feel about the Farseer Trilogy in a general way, and how that builds a foundation maybe for your books for Robin Hobb?
Well, I think the one thing that I always think about when I think about Robin Hobb is the authenticity of her perspective in Fitz, and how that feels, and how it actually feels like a real person that I know that does have consistent inconsistencies, and how frustrating they can be. Deliciously frustrating is how I described it in one of my reviews, I believe, and quite frustrating. And it is a bit of a slice of life, but there's a whole lot more there. And you have to kind of keep in perspective that Farseer is the beginning of this. And to see where you come from book 1 to book 3 is quite the journey. And when you look back and you see how far that you have come, and you realize how seamless it's all been, that is all because of the perspective of Fitz. And the passing of time is very, very tangible in Farseer, and that continues on throughout the series. Aging is a thing. And I think Hobb just understands humans to a degree that I don't know if I've ever seen out of another author. Robin Hobb is in tune with the best of us and the worst of us. And she's able to flesh out an entire side cast through a first-person perspective, which is a pretty big feat, in my opinion. So I think Robin Hobb is the best author in fiction, in my opinion. I don't know anyone that does what they set out to do better than her. So she is probably my pick for best author, if I had to pick one.
Wow. And that's saying a lot, because you all know that Jimmy's read a lot of really great fantasy. So, and so interesting. And regarding publication order and everything, Derry, this would be such a great point for you to bring up too, because from what I understand, she wrote these 3 books in pretty close succession with one another, right? That's what I heard, that she read. I haven't looked up the publication year. I think it's 1997 for this. I'll double check that.
Anyway, the first 3 came out within the sort of 2-3 year period, but the only exception to publication order for Robin Hobb is the novella, the Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince. That was published much later than everything else, and isn't essential to the story. It's one of those, if you're gonna read it, there is a place that works, but you don't have to. Like, it's not one of those that is retconned into a position. But as far as Assassin's Apprentice goes, it's odd that it has this label as classic fantasy. As Alex said, you go in with that concept that it's going to be this traditional fantasy thing, when she was exactly in the moment that bridged classic fantasy and what we know now as modern fantasy. It was among the first books that weren't so obviously Tolkien derivative. It took a step in a new direction, and it was prepared to have ambiguity. Is this person really evil? Is this person actually driven by something good? For me, it was a fresh of breath air. It was a breath of fresh air. And the first-person POV that kind of takes you by the hand and really gently kind of brings you into this world with a little boy means you get to absorb it, and suddenly you understand where you are, you understand who everybody is, and it never feels like you've been given a big huge dump of this is the world, this is who's important. You've just kind of grown into it. It's just such a peaceful sort of drawing into a world that suddenly there's a lot going on, and there's still so much to learn, but you're comfortable. It's great.
Beautifully said. Yes. And now we also have Theo on the stream with us. So this
Hi.
is Theo from Rekindled Reader. Hello, Theo.
Hi guys. I was just hanging out watching you guys. I forgot I was even part of this.
Hi.
So you're in time to share with us your spoiler-free thoughts on the Farseer
Yeah.
Trilogy and just your general thoughts on why people should read this trilogy.
Right now, my general thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, so when I popped in, I was just listening to Derry, and she was talking about how, it's a slow, peaceful, developmental kind of introduction to this world and these characters. And I just feel, and I wanted to actually ask, because a lot of people consider it what we call a slow burn, right? And I'm wondering if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Because my first, like when I first read Assassin's Apprentice, I was prepared for that, but I don't think I really understood the extent to which this was a character study and kind of a character driven story versus, like you said, like a classic fantasy book, right? I kind of thought it'd be a bit of a mix. And of course we have the fantasy, but it's definitely slow and it's definitely character first. And that was kind of my, and that's what kind of kept me reading. But I don't think I was really prepared for how much of a slow burn it was. I didn't realize I like that kind of story. I think I do. And I'm wondering if that's put people off, if people appreciate that about it. And if people go into it thinking it's going to be fantasy and are upset that it's maybe not what they thought. So I ended up with a question. Sorry.
Yeah. Interesting. So I think that you're right. I think for me, it really helped my expectations going in, hearing that it was going to be a slow burn.
Yeah.
So I tend to like those type of stories anyway. But it's hard to tell. I mean, does anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we all know I'm in all of the Hobb threads I can find. So I find a lot of new readers, and the expectation of a slow burn I actually think is quite important. If you've gone into this expecting epic fantasy, if you've gone in expecting high drama and high stakes immediately, you're going to be really disappointed. So going in with the expectation of a slow burn means at the very least you aren't going in with the wrong idea.
Right.
It might not be exactly right, but you aren't going in expecting the pace that it is. A slow burn, you go in and you're like, oh, okay, there's actually a little bit more here than I was expecting, and that's a good thing. So I don't have a problem at all with people saying it's a slow burn. What I have a problem with is people saying nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that too, because I think I had heard people say that or somebody say that. And it was kind of funny because preparing for tonight, I was looking through my notes and thinking, whoa, so much happened in Assassin's Quest.
Yeah.
But I guess it really depends on what you attend to as a reader. And so again, if you're attending to those high action scenes, or, in a lot of modern fantasy these days, there's a lot of guts and gore and that kind of thing. And maybe that is going to feel slow from that point of view. But if you are into character studies, which I happen to love character studies, so it was very, I felt like there was a lot to process here.
Yeah. I also think the slow pace kind of made the more emotional moments hit harder than they would have if it was just constantly something going on.
Yeah, that's true. For sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It definitely builds on some like inner turmoil, and then things that happen seem to have more impact as a result of that. It really feels earned for sure. It's intense. Great.
And you feel the pressure building because you're with them, and you can feel the stress of it taking a long time, and you can feel the worry that's building and building and building, which you don't get if you're told. And then 6 weeks later, you don't gain that sense of dread and impending something has to happen. And it's important because of the way she writes. You need to know the emotional stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully said, Evie, by the way. By slow burn, Hobb allows you a deeper intimacy with Fitz, and through him, the characters around him. That's perfectly said. Yeah.
If I can ask a question, and I saw Scott. What's up, Scott? He was talking about how people complain about Assassin's Quest and the length of that book in particular. And I know we're here to talk about that book probably at the forefront. And I wanted to ask what you guys thought about, because I liked Assassin's Quest probably more than maybe most people. Like I quite like it. I think Alex quite enjoyed it as well. We probably all did.
Yeah.
I think. Do you guys think it matters how quickly you read one book after another? For example, I took a couple months off between reading Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest, and I think that made me more appreciative and more patient with that story, and I was kind of savoring that last act, call it, of the trilogy. Whereas if I went right into it, I may have thought it was a little long in the tooth at that point. If I went back to back, it's a big book, and I think there's a little fat that probably could have been trimmed. But I loved it, and I think that's because I took some time off in between, and then I was back into the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess we could answer that question spoiler free, and then from there we'll go right into spoilers, so we could talk about the fat or whatever we want to talk about. Because I like the fat too.
I mean, I would agree. I think recently I started reading series, kind of not binging. I think for the longest time I was just binging series, so I would just read one after the other until I finished it. And you definitely get that sense of burnout or something similar when you start making your way through series like that, especially ones that are longer and are not like 300 pages for each book or something like that. So I think having a couple books in between Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest for me definitely helped. That
was good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I know the only thing that I compare this to is how when I read Name of the Wind, I read Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear back to back. And by the end of the Wise Man's Fear, I did tire of both at the end of that book, even though the beginning of that book was, I think, maybe my favorite part of the whole duology that's out so far. But yeah, I always wondered if I would have maybe had a slightly different experience with the Wise Man's Fear, though I know it's universally not as loved as the first book, if I had spaced it out, because first person, you're in somebody's head for a long time. And I guess it really kind of depends on your relationship with the person. But that said, and this is just me and my personal perspective, I connected with Fitz very deeply. I feel like I saw myself in Fitz. Like I've joked about that, about how my husband has read the first two books in this trilogy. And I even asked him, I said, did you think of me when you read this? When you read these books, did you think of me the whole time? And he said no. But I think that just speaks to how relatable she makes that character, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
For me, she did.
Yeah.
But I could see that not relating to everybody. So I really think it depends. I think you're right, Theo. I think you're onto something about either spreading out the books or also just how deeply you connect with Fitz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I know, Jimmy, you've said that you just love Fitz, like reading about Fitz doing anything, right?
Yeah, he could be shoveling, manure, and I'm there. I did not take a break between the books, and I didn't have a problem with Assassin's Quest. Towards the end, I had some things that kind of felt like I was being, hit with the fire hose with some of the lore and stuff, and that was what I kind of said in my reviews back in the day, and I still stand by that. But Assassin's Quest is the book that absolutely ages the best out of all of the books, especially in Farseer, in my opinion, as you go through the later stuff, and you'll see why. And yeah, I don't know, I liked Assassin's Quest. I actually didn't know that was a hot take at the time. I was not aware of that.
This is another thing, and this will probably go way too off topic, but I'll just share briefly here, is I also wonder, and people will probably disagree with me and say they've always been doing this since before they discovered BookTube. But before BookTube, sorry to sound like an old person, I never used to rank books and think, I like this book better than this book and this book. I never used to think that way.
I still don't.
Like when I read A Song of Ice and Fire, I never once thought, book 3 is the best. I don't like 4 and 5. I never thought that way. I just loved everything I had.
Yeah.
Loved it.
There is something to be said about an overall narrative. Also, is like the body of work that you're reading at the time comes to a conclusion, and then you start to make judgments. But generally, there is a broader sense of story in the vision of the artist, and I think that gets lost a lot of the times with the pressure to want to rank things and compare and contrast. Like I just think it's honestly, for me, when I start to sit down and go, all right, what's the top 5 here? Like I feel silly. I do. I don't know. I've never really been big into that, I guess. And part of it's because it's a daunting task anyways. But when you look at the overall narrative of a series like Realm of the Elderlings, or for example, Dune, I see a lot of people read book 1 of Dune and they say, hey, this book has some interesting things, but there's also a bit of, there's some tropes here that I don't necessarily like. And it's not till Dune Messiah that you see the deconstruction of some of those tropes.
Yeah, totally.
So they are absolutely valid in their opinion. However, they are missing the other parts of the story. So it's an interesting thing.
Story goes on.
Yeah. All right. Well, from here, I think it's a good place. I'm sorry I'm having a hard time keeping up with this chat. It's just hopping tonight. So this is exciting. I'm still fairly new at live shows, so sorry if I missed I miss anybody's comment here, but we're gonna go.
It's awesome. There are so many.
I know there are so many.
There are so many familiar people in the chat,
and they're all so happy. So it makes me very happy. So we're going right into Assassin's Quest now. So full spoilers for Assassin's Quest. All right. So I guess where to start with this? I am just gonna start, unless anybody else wants to offer another starting point. I'd be open to that, but I don't know why my instinct is to start with Burrich, if I'm saying his name right. Burrich, you can correct me, but I just want to start with that character, especially as it starts. We have such an emotional beginning, recognizing his place at the end of Royal Assassin. Mm-hmm. So, Burrich, thoughts on him? And I guess we could start with Alex again.
Yeah. Well, for Burrich at the start, I would definitely say going into Assassin's Quest, I had no idea how we were going to start that book after the ending of Royal Assassin. But I think one of the most powerful scenes in Assassin's Quest for me was the beginning when Fitz is like being cared for by Burrich and Chade, and he's like trying to learn everything again and just learn how to be human. And then he just goes off on Burrich, and just like that whole scene was for me so like, wow. It was like really emotional, and it was probably in chapter 4 or something, like right at the beginning. Yeah. And then you don't really see him. I mean, for the most of the book, it's through
little snippets.
Yeah. You never actually see him in person.
Yeah.
But he was just a really interesting character, and I actually think how Burrich ends up, especially with Molly and that whole twist that I kind of saw coming, but not until this book. I loved it. I thought it was like a great kind of arc for his character.
I did too.
In this trilogy.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So Theo, you want to go ahead?
I'm a big Burrich fan, and I love him. Go there before I start gushing.
Oh, yeah, no, it's fine. I am too. I have a lot of gushing to go to say. But Theo, you said you were nodding along with that.
Yeah, I think Burrich is, I say Burrich, I don't know. I listened to the audio, and to be honest, I don't remember what they say. I think it's Burrich, but at least I say Burrich. And I think he's probably one of my favorite characters. I think him and the Fool are like my top characters of this trilogy. And of course I haven't read further, and so I've only read these 3 books. But yeah, the way we start, and some of the things, very realistically, some of the things that Fitz says that he can't take back, to Chade and to Burrich, just like stung when I was hearing him say this stuff. And to know how much Burrich cares and how much Chade care, and the way that they go about trying to help in their own different ways, because you have this kind of contrast between these two almost father figures, right? And so I love that. And then you're right, Alex. When I wrote that down as one of my favorite moments when my jaw dropped. I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't really see it coming as much, and my jaw just dropped when the revelation, with him and Molly, and then I thought how perfect that was, just how perfect it really was. I don't know if maybe not everyone wanted that, but I think it was perfect. So yeah, I love Burrich. He's awesome.
Yeah. So I have a lot to say about Burrich. So I want to make sure I give Jimmy and Derry some time to talk to them. So Jimmy, tell us your memories, at least of that point, of what you thought of him in that. And you could add anything about Chade too, if you want to.
I'm going to call him Burrich because that's how I've always said it.
Please do. I mispronounce everything.
Yeah, I know.
So.
Yeah, it's just how I say it. So Burrich is a Chad. He's just a Chad, Like,
I love it when you say that word. Oh my god!
Because he has a good balance of doing what he wants to do, but then doing what he's supposed to do, and that's the difference between an adult and a child. Is that adults do what they're supposed to do when they have a job to do it. And he was given the job of raising Fitz, and he did it even whenever he didn't necessarily feel like doing it. So that makes a very interesting dynamic between Burrich and Fitz during all of Farseer, and then it comes to a head at the beginning of Assassin's Quest. Because Burrich wasn't always the best to Fitz, and Fitz wasn't always fair to Burrich in his situation either. So there's this mega internal conflict of I don't want to say love and hate, but there is some sort of resentment there. And maybe on the worst day that Fitz has ever had, it comes out, right? So the consequences of what we see at the end of Royal Assassin end up coming into play immediately in the first 100 to 200 pages in Assassin's Quest, and is, for my dollar, probably 200 of the best pages in fiction. I mean, you want to talk about pacing, right? And I think pacing is actually kind of it's so subjective, right?
Yeah.
I know people who say the slog doesn't exist in Wheel of Time. They're like, I love all the kind. What do you mean nothing happens? So stuff happens. So it's just interesting because the pace of a Robin Hobb book is considered to be slow or whatever. But for me, I was glued to the page and I would never stop reading these chapters until I believe it was chapter 1 to 12, because 12 had an excellent moment that I can't recall exactly what it was. I just remember chapter 12 sticking out in my head for Assassin's Quest. So a lot of people would say, the beginning of Assassin's Quest is very slow and there's a lot of emotional turmoil, but for me, I was glued to the page. So to me, that's fast pace. How fast do the pages go by is really how I judge pacing. That might not be correct, but Burrich is Chad. Yeah.
I love that, because honestly, I thought that Chad, I thought I learned that word from you, Jimmy.
You did.
I suddenly remembered, but then I suddenly remembered that I had read an article about a decade ago called Chad or Dad. And so Burrich is both a Chad and a dad.
He is a bit of a Chad dad.
Chad dad, yeah. And there's Chade. And
Chad dad.
So I have so much to say. Jerry, do you want to go first?
But Burrich is a lot.
There's a lot.
I do.
A lot to
Itching to talk about Burrich. I've always loved Burrich, and and Jimmy said it nicely with that. There's a resentment there, and a lot of friction between he and Fitz. I mean, and this touches into some other things with Molly and the people who haven't really agreed with where that went. Burrich is younger than I think a lot of readers realize. Fitz sees him as an old man, but Fitz is a child. Anybody over 20 is an old person. And so Burrich isn't as old as you get the sense of early. And he's been thrust into looking after a child that isn't his. He's never been around children to look after them, and suddenly he's a young man who has a kid, and an important kid. So he can't kind of shrug him off like it's nothing. And then the things that he did as Fitz was younger, particularly around Nosy, means that Fitz has grown up with this concrete idea in his head of very strict, very hard-lined man who could kill him if he steps too far out of line. And no matter how that changes as far as the facts that we learn, that emotional core of Fitz remains frightened of the person they gave him to look after him. And that forms such a huge part of who Fitz becomes. Whereas Burrich knows that everything he's done has been to protect this child and keep this child safe from all of the factors the child is unaware of. And so feels, I've given this child everything. And how unfair it is. So the hurt that comes to Burrich in those opening moments of Assassin's Quest, to the reader, cut you to the quick, because you know how much that hurt them. You know how close to the bone Fitz has got with those statements. Because Burrich is a rock. Archimedes said he could move the world with a big enough lever and a good enough place to stand. He could stand on Burrich. Burrich is solid. Nothing about him changes. His loyalty is 100%. His honesty, his morality, none of that changes. Burrich is who he is the entirety of Farseer. And so Molly can trust him. So yes, that romance becomes believable because everything he does is borne out. He doesn't lie to her at any point. He doesn't hide anything he's doing. And it's foreign to her. And so it takes her a while to understand it's not a front. This is who he is. And that makes Burrich, for me, one of my all-time favorite people in fiction.
He did lie to her, though, once.
Those are my thoughts on Burrich.
He did lie to her, though, at one point when he was drunk. Because he said, oh, I'm not drunk. He lied about that. But I do appreciate that Hobb gives a very complex perspective on alcohol. So obviously Molly's father was an alcoholic and very abusive alcoholic. But Burrich, I'll say Burrich. I'll try to change. But thank you, Hannah. I'm glad I'm not the only one. but basically, she gives a complex perspective on alcoholism. Like, she doesn't say just because somebody is an addict, they're going to be abusive. So in his case, it's a different kind. It comes out in a different way. But but at the same time, I love what you said, because he is really tormented with guilt over what he had to do at the end of Royal Assassin. He had to pretend that he cut off all ties with Fitz. He had to go through great lengths to sort of make Fitz die and bring him back, and that whole entire wild plot that happened. And he lost patience. The woman patience. He lost patience as a result of that, because he explains in a really interesting dialogue sequence about how he walked away from her, and he did that out of doing what he felt was right in that situation, in the backstory. But he felt he could do that to some degree because she still respected him as a man. But after she thought that he cut off ties with Fitz, she said, she accused him. He felt she hated him, that he had no loyalty and no love, and nothing could have been further from the truth. And that was paining him. So he was pained by guilt for what he did to Fitz, and he was pained by guilt for the patients believing something that wasn't true about him. And then you sort of look at that whole relationship, like being able to sort of carry on knowing the person you love or you were in love with hates you. And then I look at that and the false pretenses behind that versus, and I know I'm kind of going slightly off tangent here, versus Fitz kind of deluding Molly about himself and her not loving him because she thinks he's dead. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting the way, if you look at those two relationships in contrast with one another, like which one would you rather take? Would you rather the person you're in love with just hate you because they believe something is not true about you? Or would you rather the person you're in love with think you're dead and move on? Because it's just, there's so many complex, interesting perspectives regarding relationships there. So before I go further, I just want to add one more thing about Burrich, and we can add more. I'm sorry, I could talk all day about him. But one thing I found really interesting about him is his relationships with animals and how that's brought into his character. Because one thing I couldn't help but remember, I had a friend at one point who said that you can always tell how somebody is as a parent based on how they treat their dog. And
Yes.
I always thought about that. And
Yes.
it really, that quote came up in my head when I read about how he treated little Nettle. And Molly wasn't used to that type of parental figure. She was used to punishment as discipline.
Mhm.
Punishment
Mhm.
equals discipline. And he shows a totally different way. He totally changes her whole paradigm. So there's this whole theme about, ways of leadership. And then if you look at that versus Regal's King Circle, which we can get into in a minute, I just found that all fascinating. I mean, there's so many things that you can juxtapose in this book.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I have one last thing to add about Burrich was, did any of you notice his kind of bond with Vixen, the dog that he had? And did any of you spot it, notice it? Did you have feelings on it?
That was a dog he lost, or I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah.
I do remember him losing. I think I remember him losing that dog, and I it's not staying with me for some reason.
Yeah, does he talk about that, Derry, in Assassin's
It's one of
Quest?
those little subtle
He
Hobb
mentions
things.
it, right?
He
Yeah.
he actually talks to Fitz about it in Royal. They're often but for the battle there, and Fitz is like, "How can you judge me for this? You have this."
Right.
And Nighteyes is talking to Burrich, and he's like, "They all knew you. They all knew you, Heart of the Pack." And just sort of says, "You can't stop them bonding to you." Vixen was like that. She held on and wouldn't let go.
Yeah.
So it was a one-sided bond,
Break my heart.
but one that
Wow.
he kind of, and it just is so beautiful to know that he didn't get rid of Vixen. He didn't force his sort of no, what it is bad on the animal. He was like, she doesn't know that it's evil, as he. And I just thought that gave just another facet to it. That in him. So.
Wow. So beautifully said. I don't know. I'm sure I'll have to pay attention to that. I'll have to go back and reread that part. So let's talk about the other Chad, which is Chade.
Bit of a Chad.
Chade is a Chad. Did I say right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Chad.
Chade is a Chad. I love Chade. I was talking about this. I think I mentioned this in a comment to Alex on my video about visualizing and stuff, because Chade is not described as a very attractive person visually, physically, but I just kept wanting to visualize him as the hottest person ever, because he's so, I know, and he's quite a bit older and everything too, but I loved him. I love that man.
Yeah, Chade is I don't know what I can say because I can't remember what's in Tawny Man and what's in.
Oh no!
I think that, I mean, it would be hard.
I like knowing. Sorry.
Yeah, I was to say it'd be hard to say which relationship of Fitz is the most complicated, but certainly Chade has to be the one that I think I've put most time into thinking about.
Yeah, me too, probably.
Yeah.
We'll say the ending. Not to jump to the ending or anything, but when it gets revealed that Regal died of the rat, or I forget what the actual animal, the ferret rat. And then they mentioned that Chade always had a ferret with him at all the times, and I just thought that was a super cool connection. That's cool. But yeah, I never pictured, when it comes to the visualizing Chade, I agree with you, because then I saw one of the Michael Whalen covers, and he's like this super old, skinny man on the cover, and I was just like, that's not what I pictured.
No,
I know. Well, I think I fell in love with
I just
Chade.
pictured him.
How'd you picture him? Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I just pictured him as sort of a slightly older Verity with, the pop cars. and that he was a bit of a babe. And later we discover Shade's also a player. You know,
Yeah.
'cause
Yeah.
Fitz
Yeah.
gets
He's
a little
away
bit of
with
him.
her. Yeah.
In the quest where he's, you know, entertaining a member of the guard, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
go Shade. But yeah.
Yeah. He's an interesting one. He honestly won my heart in book 1, even though I didn't know if I could trust anybody in book 1, and I still have trust issues when it comes to characters in Farseer. But but the moment that he came to Fitz's bed and held him and had him cry in his arms, like that scene broke me. And so ever since then, I've always loved Chade. I've always felt like a soft spot for him. I've always felt like his soft spot for Fitz. And so I just love that man. It's interesting because, you know, and by the way, I'm okay with not talking about this book in a linear way. I don't tend to talk about books in linear ways, as Jimmy knows. And so, but I loved at the end of this book, he talks about how, I think it's the Fool. Yeah, the Fool is the one who tells Fitz that not even Verity's supposed death brought him out, not King Shrewd's death brought him out. It was when he thought that Fitz was dead that he was moved to anger and action. That's how much he loves Fitz. He loves him, and that just won me over for him. I love Chade, but Burrich and Chade, what incredible father figures that she writes in this.
Also, you know, it's not a wizard and its apprentice, but assassin and his apprentice, right, with Fitz. And it's like much different than anything at this point in fantasy when this is published, you know, in the 90s. Like, this wasn't a relationship you would typically see between a wizard and their apprentice or assassin. You know, they're like a leader or teacher, old wise teacher, and their student. It's usually pure endearment. This is a little bit more sticky.
Yeah.
I was watching Jimmy, your discussion
what I said earlier. This was so different to everything.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Jimmy, I was watching your discussion with Chris Bookish Cauldron. He was mentioning how, like, both Burrich and Chade, you kind of get the feeling that they wish Fitz were their like biological son. At many points throughout the story, and I was like,
I can see that.
I mean, in like different ways, and they're both have obviously very different father type relationships between them and Fitz, and I thought that was super interesting.
I think non-biological parenthood is something that Robin Hobb has an obsession with, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
So speaking of how she sort of breaks out of these sort of more traditional boundaries, I want to talk about the Fool. Because one thing that I was so impressed with in the whole conversation on love, there was a lot of really interesting discussion on what love is and about love and gender. Yeah. And the Fool was just absolutely, the Fool was fascinating in this book. Yeah. He changed quite a bit too. He was definitely not quite as enigmatic as he was in previous books. He seemed a little more like fleshed out. He came to color a bit. He definitely changed. And he also clearly loved Fitz. It's kind of strange because I do question people's love of Fitz sometimes in this book, in this series. Because I guess I'll just talk more generally, because as much as, for example, the Fool says he loves Fitz, then there's the whole scene where there's a reunion in the Mountain Kingdom. It seemed to me as though, although the Fool seemed happy to see Fitz again and that he was alive, and just lamented on how Fitz used to be a beautiful man, I guess. It seemed to me like the Fool was more preoccupied in my mind about his prophecy than what Fitz wanted. And the same thing with Kettle and the Six Duchies and Fitz's baby. Everybody's talking about what to do with Fitz's baby, and Fitz feels very betrayed by this starling. That's another complex character to talk about. And her song, and how it seemed like she put more on her song than him. So it seemed like everybody cared. It did seem at that point. I know there was an amazing discussion at the beginning of the book between Chade and Burrich and Fitz about agendas and agency and choices and impulsivity and good intentions and this and that. But at that particular scene at the Mountain Kingdom, I did feel like it was a powerful, powerful point in the book where Fitz is actually shedding all of his hidden layers of who he was, all his hidden identities, just letting himself be seen in every single possible way, letting the wit, the skill, all of it, Nighteyes, all of it be seen. But at the same time, it just felt like everybody had their own agendas. And so, yeah, thoughts on that? Full agendas, whatever I just talked about. Sorry, I rambled.
Well, it definitely feels like everyone uses Fitz in a way, not in like a bad connotation, but it feels like
Usually is a
everyone
bad
has,
connotation.
yeah, like everyone has a agenda when it comes to Fitz. So
Yeah.
half the time, I'm like, is it how much you like love him, or is it just what you want to use him to get to, or something like that? And I really loved seeing the Fool a lot more in this book, but I think there's still so many questions that I didn't get answered when it came to the Fool that I would have liked to at the end of Farseer. But yeah, I mean, his presence in this book was significantly more than we ever saw in the first two books. So I really liked that, because he was one of the more interesting characters that I was reading about when we were reading Royal Assassin's Apprentice. And I wanted to see more of him. And so while we didn't see some other characters in this book that a lot of people bring that up as like a knock against this book at some points, I really enjoyed seeing the Fool as much as we did.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. By the way, there's a wonderful quote that I wrote down where Fitz is interacting with the blind minstrel, the musicians.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he's trying to get away from them. They're trying to string him in to help them. And he's thinking in his head that he wonders if there's a way to live among people and not be harnessed by their expectations and dependencies. Because he always feels like he's being, like being in relationships with people means kind of having to compromise and cooperate or to work with them on some level.
Yeah.
I know for me, my issue is that because people are always like, nobody cares about Fitz and they're all using him. They all love Fitz, but they all also see Fitz as something else. The Fool loves seeing Fitz again in the mountains. You see the joy in him that Fitz is alive. And his badness comes from that Fitz is also his catalyst. So for his very existence to have meaning, he has to keep putting Fitz at risk. So Fitz as catalyst is a tragedy for the Fool, because he has to put this person he loves in danger. The Fitz and Kettrican, beautiful relationship, beautiful friendship, but Kettrican is the sacrifice, and to her Fitz is the heir. And whether or not Fitz as the person wants to be the heir, he is. So he's Fitz the person and Fitz the heir. And on the grand scheme of things, as a queen in waiting, she has to fit the heir into her plans more than she can do that for Fitz the person. So you get this with everybody that deals with Fitz. They love him as an individual, but what he represents to them is something they have to use because of who he is, what his bloodline is, what his magics are. And all of them have a guilt almost for having to do that, except Starling, who's just shameless about,
I know.
I'm following you for a song.
She really upset me at one point. I mean, because she has this whole entire quote in which she talks about that, about like honor and courtesy and justice, that they're not real Fits, and that people who like let go of them, they just end up using them against people. She says that, but then what does that mean about her? and then she admits that. So like,
She's
are you saying that? What are you saying about yourself?
But she's a victim of trauma, and
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's the thing, is as a victim of trauma, you understand that boundaries are imaginary and people will take from you. You know, the evil people out there aren't bound by your boundaries because they're not real. You imagine them. You want everybody to imagine them, and then the world is a lovely place. But not everybody does. And trauma can take you to a place where instead of respecting those boundaries more, you simply accept that they don't exist and act accordingly. And that's where Starling comes from. But if right back to the beginning to what we initially were going to talk about with, was my favorite of the entire saga from scenes when they're talking about love and they're talking about the nature of love. And he says, and it's such a simple expression, but I just adore it, love is more than plumbing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he sees it as this far greater thing than the physicality you're born into. And I love that quote from the series, because for me encapsulate who the fool is.
Yeah.
I love the Fool. I love the Fool so much. Fantastic character.
We're kind of talking about people like using Fitz or having Fitz plays a role to many different people throughout Farseer. And that gives him a little bit of a struggle with his identity, because as Assassin's Quest is happening, he's making his way across the duchies. He's not who he's been these last few years. Like, he went from nobody to being someone remarkable, to being infamous, and now kind of just traveling. And it's really interesting to see him interact with the duchies and with people who do not have any expectations of his royalty. And you see actually a whole other side of Fitz that sometimes can actually be a little bit more grating, in my opinion, because sometimes he forgets that to these people, I am not just royalty, right? I am just another person. So I thought that his quest through the duchies was really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to bring up, unless anybody wants to add.
I was just going to say about the quest part.
Yeah.
It became a very old-fashioned quest because it was about him helping people on his way, on his journey, what lessons he learned from each encounter. And in moving from Buck to the mountains, traveling through the 6 duchies, he learns who he is responsible for. He learns who his people are, and that in his role as a Farseer, his job is to look after them and to make sure they're safe on the highways, and to make sure they're not going to get forged, and to make sure they're not at risk from greedy tax blokes. And he learns that on his way, and that very traditional quest process of learning as he reaches his goal. I think part of that is what annoys some younger readers. It's so slow, it's so old-fashioned, but for me it was just magical in that fairy tale way, that he's learning that lesson as he goes, and by the time he reaches the mountains, he kind of gets what everybody's fighting for. So yeah, that was the last thing on that.
No, yeah. All right. It's easy to distrust people's love of Fitz when they all seem to be using him for the purpose they have, with exception of patience and Burrich, maybe. Yeah, it's just really complicated. I want to ask you all though. Oh, sorry. Is anybody? Did I interrupt? Okay. Try not to talk too much. So I guess from here I want to segue into the interesting development that happens at the end when Verity and Fitz basically trade bodies.
Yep.
Thoughts on that? Yeah, I was wondering if I read that right. I was like, did that just happen? Like,
kind of hot.
Kind of hot, yeah. Yeah, one for Fitz for sure.
I was like, I was actually waiting for something to happen because when we were talking in the Royal Assassin show, someone was talking about, oh, just wait till we were talking about like the scene with Nighteyes and from Royal Assassin, and then someone was like, oh, just wait till Assassin's Quest. And so I was like 75% through Assassin's Quest, and I was like, well, nothing
What
like
are they
that has
talking
happened
about?
yet. Yeah. And then we got to that scene, and I was like, oh, and I still read it twice just to be like, what?
Yeah, me too. Just to be sure. Just to be sure.
I was like,
I did
who's
too.
it? What?
I was confused. And so I don't know I still don't know how I feel about this. And I know Noelle in the Royal Assassin live show, she got after me for distrusting Verity. But I still am not always sure about Verity, even in this book. And
I was
even
going to
though-
ask that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that. I wonder, because, and again, I've only read this trilogy, but did Verity like annoy anybody else? Like by the end, I was kind of just like at first in the first couple books, and particularly the first one, I was like, oh man, like, you know, like Verity, right? And by the last book, I was kind of annoyed by his character, and I was just like, figure it out. And he just wasn't giving us enough, and he was kind of just all consumed. And I just felt like obviously he's going through stuff and he's not the same person, obviously, but he just was kind of annoying to me. And I don't really know why, and I wonder if anyone felt similarly.
I'm sorry, Noelle. I feel so bad.
I know I wanted to like him so much more, but yeah.
I had a lot of empathy for his addiction / obsession, and someone coming to the end of their life, and he's trying to do right. Like at the end of the day, like I mean, he really was trying to do right, and ultimately they end up, saving the duchies for it. Yeah. So to me, I looked at it as a massive sacrifice. And the interesting thing about the Assassin's Quest is that, again, in this time period of fantasy, usually it's one person making the sacrifice, but we see a lot of other people have to sacrifice their memories and their pain. And I just think that if Verity hadn't been exactly what he was, then the other characters would have never had the gall or the bravery to give up said memories and their trauma and their pain. So Verity, in a lot of ways, bared the weight of the sacrifice, and gave everyone else enough courage. So for me, Verity's like an all-star.
Yeah, and I feel compelled to qualify that a bit. Like at the end, once things wrap up, you can't help but be empathetic to the whole thing, and you see exactly what was happening, and you really understand kind of the significance of everything, and really how and why he was consumed, and how this could have developed, right? But yeah, there was a period where I'm just like, oh man, like I don't know, he bothered me a little bit near the end, but yeah, but once it wrapped up, it was beautiful. And I have to say, the ending of this book and the trilogy, I thought was beautiful. I thought it was awesome.
Yes. There's so much there to talk about.
Yeah. Well, we can save that.
I want to say on that, on the Verity thing is he literally spent himself saving the kingdom.
Yeah.
In the earlier books, it was through skilling, and his physicality was wasting away as his skill was becoming more and more the tool he used to defend the kingdom. And then obviously he's in the mountain, and he's literally spending himself to build this dragon, to create the life in this dragon. And he will, I'm going to use it, he will abuse the trust that Fitz has in him to use his body so that his kingdom can have an heir with the right bloodline. And he knows that it's an abuse of that trust, and he knows that it's wrong, and he even uses that outrage to fuel the dragon he's trying to build to protect his kingdom. And the selflessness of that is, the purity of that selflessness is just amazing to me, that Verity gets as little love fandom as he does, because he was, every single thing he ever did was about protecting the kingdom. And even that worst moment when he does abuse Fitz and does that with his body is tragic in its own way. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that weird scene, that it's tragic.
Well, I don't, and I'm not saying that Verity isn't lovable in his own way. I didn't hate Verity. I just questioned him at times. But I feel at the same time, especially, I just want to go back to what Jimmy was saying, because I think him making himself, I think one thing that Hobb does an amazing job on is since Assassin's Apprentice, you get you get a lot of information about how Verity is. He's really like a military man first. He's a strategist, and he's always thinking that way. And he's a very dutiful person. It looks like we have Theo unconnected, but I'm sure he'll be back when he gets a chance. But it seems like he's very driven by that duty and by being a sacrifice. And based on what Jimmy was saying about that, I totally agree. And I think he also makes a good match for Kettle in that regard, because Kettle being the sacrifice and that kind of thing. I hadn't thought about that until you said that, Jimmy. So thank you for that. That was really interesting.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And also what you
And
were
that's
saying.
the other part of the tragedy.
Yeah.
That they only found each other as a couple at the end.
Yeah. And then they had to sacrifice everything. It's like it all kind of worked itself out in that way, didn't it? Kind of sad, but kind of what they wanted at the same time, even though it was so painful.
Yeah.
And I think
they were both prepared to pay the cost.
Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and counter against what I just said about Verity and some of the things. I did have some questions and I did have concerns about what Verity was doing at times. And I understand that's a little short-sighted given those bigger motivations and sort of what's at stake here. But I also think that Verity did care about Fitz. I would not deny that. And actually, I think Kettle's perspective helped me see that too. Because Kettle, I think she did a really great job of sort of clarifying that too. That Fitz was the one person holding back the dragon from being animated because he felt so guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on Kettle? Because I really like Kettle, but I wasn't a Kestrel.
Oh, I loved Kettle. I would love to hear anybody's thoughts on Kettle. Sure.
Kettle in the coterie.
I thought she was intriguing the whole way. I think at first I was kind of like, it's just another character we meet on the road. But as we started to kind of move through the book with her, she became more and more intriguing. And it kind of started to be clear that there was more to her than she was letting on. And then when you got to the end, it was, I don't know. I thought she was a very interesting character throughout the entire book.
Yeah.
I feel like out of all of the characters out of all 16 books, she's the character I remember the least about.
Oh, wow.
Like, I know she was in the coterie, but like, I don't remember shit else, to be honest. Like, I don't know why. It's just like, she gone.
Yeah. I loved Kettle because I guess I just detached myself to Kettle because I just found her very complex. And I love the way that Fitz loved her. He liked her right away, or he attached himself to her right away. And I liked that because I think we just don't have a lot of older women in fantasy in general. And when we do, it's the crone, right? The crone archetype. And I don't think of Kettle that way. Kettle has her flaws. She has her strengths. And there was so much more dimension to her. And the fact that like the whole entire scene where he looks into Kettle and tries to go through the scar with the skill, I loved that because it was like he had to force down the perspective of seeing Kettle as this hard, angry, scarred woman. He had to see the young Kettle, and he had to kind of force his way in to see that there was more complexity, more to this person. And it's so easy, I think. We just don't really look at older people in fantasy with that much complexity, with that much dimension, in my opinion. Or I don't feel like I see a lot, especially with women. And so I was grateful for having her in there. And maybe I just attached to her because of that. But I thought that was beautifully done. And I think her character served a lot of it really served a purpose in the narrative.
Mhm.
Looking for the white prophet, by the way, Alex, did you figure out right away she was talking about the fool, or did it come later?
Pretty quickly, but not right off the bat, but pretty quickly, just because I was who else?
I
Is it?
did. I wrote down a note. I'm like, she's the fool. But yeah.
I liked that she was always given independence. As you say, she was an old lady, but she was traveling alone. She was making this journey on her own. She criticizes the other people she's traveling with for not being able to make decisions on their own. And when the smaller band break off and leave the Mountain Kingdom to go into their travel, they don't even tell her they're going. She simply follows and makes that decision for herself. Even though she wasn't included in that group, she was going to travel with them, and she did, whether they were going to plan for her or not. And I really liked the independence that showed for her, that she could and did make her own plans and was going to act on them regardless. And yeah, I really liked that streak of grit that Kettle had. I really admired that. To see it was great.
Yeah, and she was hard too. She was a fierce person at times, and I want to talk about one specific moment, and maybe this will jog your memory, Jimmy, but there was a scene where she actually told Fitz, she kind of tried to give him some insight. She kind of tried to shake him up about Molly and say, your love for her, you aren't really in love with Molly, you're in love with the memory of who you two were.
Yeah.
And it's pretty powerful because early on in the book, Fitz talks about how the old Fitz is dead. He talks about how he's no longer that Fitz. He's a new man.
Yeah.
But obviously there was a part of him that was still there. And then, and she was constantly kind of like striking the whip on Fitz, but he needed it. And, it's so interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like this was just kind of like that Jungian quote, what you resist persists, because they're like, Fitz, don't think about Molly. Don't think about Molly. You're putting Molly in danger. Don't think about Molly. Don't think about Molly. Don't think about Molly. And so don't think about pink elephants. It's like, it's going to happen.
Yeah. Is love not, but just a collection of memories that were fond, though, if you really think about it? Like, without memories, right? This is why people take so much, put so much weight into taking pictures in these things. That's like when you break up with someone, like it hurts that you have the pictures, and that's why you delete them from your phone and you tear them up and you put them away, because when those moments are captured in memories, whether it be photos or in your head, that is the proof of the impact and the imprint that it had on you as a human being. And that's why it's really tough for people, especially whenever they get older and you have trouble remembering these people and how they were with you and the memories that you have together. And that's why we always say cherish the memories. So like, as much as that is like a piece of the story, though, it's also like very, very real, because without memories, there is no love, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Without memories, there's no person. I mean, in the real world, you look at people who are suffering through dementia, as their memory goes, a lot of their identity is lost with the loss of that memory.
That's right.
And they took talking about the food. He's like, I'm homesick for a time when I could talk to somebody who had the same memories, who I could share those memories with. And with the loss of Chade, he's lost a part of himself because now there's no one to have that interaction with. So those memories fade. And that ties into Kettle and the memories of Molly. And that's an important thing to remember. Your memories are a core part of who you are as an individual. So, it's why you see Nighteyes be so anti-Fitz giving those memories to Girl on a Dragon. He's like, I don't actually want to be with someone with no memories. Yeah. Don't do that. So it's important.
There's so much to be said about this. I know that you mentioned that insight last stream, Alex, about how Nighteyes or the wit kind of represents being in the moment. I feel like that does get highlighted throughout this book too, just being in the moment. and
Mhm.
maybe the fool, the
Mhm.
future, and
Yeah.
it's the past. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I can't remember the order of things.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
There's just an interesting
Yeah.
relationship to all those kind of degrees of seeing things. And
Yeah.
we already actually kind of touched on boundaries a little bit with Starling, but it's interesting too, because there's a scene in which Nighteyes actually tells Fitz, and I put boundaries in my notes, but he tells him, when you throw up walls against those who would use skill against you, you lock more than just your skill sense. So in other words, when he's trying to build these walls, but I think that's true with the skill, that maybe he's not letting certain information in as much as he's keeping information out. But I also feel like there's something to be said about love too, and pain, because when he sees that, and that was why I questioned Verity, by the way, because I do think Verity cared very much about Fitz, and I do think Verity is seeing a bigger picture, and that's why he did what he did. At the same time, it broke my heart that the way things happen, because when Fitz sees Burrich with Molly, and it breaks his heart, and he says, "Take me now, I'm done." I felt like that's not the, I mean, maybe that was the right moment in Verity's eyes, but in my eyes, I was thinking, this is temporary. You're feeling what you feel right now because you need to feel that, but that's not going to be forever for you. And so when they switched bodies, it kind of broke my heart that he seemed to think that would be some sort of fix, because it, and I think, as Kettle says, and this, again, this is another reason I love Kettle. There were so many things she said in that book that just I loved. But she said, you're going to get over this over time. This isn't going to hurt the way it hurts now forever. And the other thing is, like, if you don't, you have to kind of let yourself feel what you feel. If you try not to feel anything, then that's when the scar kind of comes up. And she experienced that for herself. She had kind of a skill scar, but at the same time, there was a deeper wound of shame and guilt behind that too, behind killing her sister. So it's like she wasn't really allowing herself to feel.
No, that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly how that formed. When we go to the boundaries, and where's I going with it? And the trauma, like I said with Starling, is that if some people deal with it one way, some people deal with it another way, and Fitz has dealt with it in a way I think anyone who practices as a psychologist or has been to therapy will tell you. Quite often trauma gets walled away and you just don't think about it. Yeah. And ultimately that's what Fitz chooses to do. Rather than walling it in himself, he gives it to Girl on a Dragon so that he doesn't have to think about it. He doesn't have to actually process those emotions. He doesn't have to actually go through the grieving process. He doesn't have any kind of closure on those memories. He just shuts them, he gives them away. He doesn't want to deal with it. And that's such a valid response to trauma. And all the way through, I remember you saying early in the piece, I think in the very first Assassin's Apprentice video, that connection that you felt with Fitz. I'd been reading these books for years before I realised that Fitz is broken because everything he did seemed perfectly logical to me because I've had some similar trauma. So all of his reactions, I was like, yeah. And other people are going, what is wrong with him doing this stupid thing?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's perfectly logical. What are you talking about? And only now in therapy, he is broken. And I genuinely never saw it. That's how well she wrote this broken person. Because I got it completely.
I know what you're saying about me.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, and I think that Kettle serves a huge purpose in that too, because she shows him you're traumatized. You remember your mother. You're mad at your mother. You just don't remember it because you don't want to. He has the same scar.
Yeah.
And the same, he and Kettle in some ways are a reflection of each other. And I mean, I guess you could say that about anybody in the book. One more but I just, yeah, I completely agree. I do want to say, I have another point to make, but I just want to make sure I give everyone a chance to talk too. Alex or Theo, if you want to add anything.
I would say one thing. I just happened to see a comment that kind of just said they, this person didn't really, or they don't really like when a character comes in, further into a story or near the end of a story, and then all of a sudden comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden has this profound impact. I think when it's done well, it's good. But that's kind of a pet peeve of mine too. When these characters come in and kind of change the dynamic or kind of add a bunch that, you're like, where did this come from? But Kettle was really good, I think. And I agree with everything you said as well, for sure. And I was listening while if I have technical difficulties, I'm sorry, I'll probably just jump off. But I was listening when everyone was talking. I was actually wanting to when I got logged off, I wanted to react to what Derry was saying, which was the reason why I think Verity was kind of frustrating was because I was so attached to Fitz. And from the point of view of Fitz, I was frustrated that Verity wasn't giving me enough information, enough of a plan to maybe, so the Fitz can help and do more. And also just that feeling of loss and is there no other way, to solve this problem than having to lose Verity, right? Like I was frustrated almost for Fitz. And I think that's why I felt the way I did. So I just wanted to qualify that extra. So I don't get hate mail. Yeah.
Yeah, I say, I mean,
but that
overall,
was the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say overall, why I think Assassin's Quest for me felt so different than the other two was like the first two had you were learning a lot about Fitz, but you were also getting a lot of like political intrigue and Royal Assassin, just some other things where I feel like Assassin's Quest was so much about his his inner turmoil, how he was reacting and responding to what happened at the end of Royal Assassin, and then just how like you were just watching him deal with this trauma. And I think for me that was fascinating, and I could see why for some people that it might seem very slow paced, as we were saying earlier, but I think that I could totally see this growing to be the book that is like my favorite out of the Farseer trilogy, which I know is crazy because Royal Assassin is
that's wacky because like I think the same thing too, and people are like, really? I'm like, the more I sit, the more I think about it, and I don't know how much weight I put on the conclusion of the trilogy itself being in this book. I don't know. The more I sit with it, it's my favorite. And you're right, Alex. Like it feels different. It's a different book in a good way, and I love it. Yeah. I mean, Royal Assassin was a banger for sure, but Assassin's Quest, I think I liked more, and I think I'm in the minority.
Yeah, I love it when each book in a series feels very different from one another.
Yeah,
that's something that I love. And one thing I want to bring up with all of this is that we're talking about the neat thing about this series, and is that you can kind of look at it from a micro perspective, like look at Fitz's trauma and Kettle's trauma and Starling's trauma, and all of these, and then all these people around him and how they're relating to him and seeing him and whatever and their guilt. And we can look at all these little minute, or not minute, but like little micro details of relationships and complexities. At the same time, I wonder what it would be like to, and Derry, you can speak to this probably, to reread this series, because you can also look at all these things from a macro perspective. And so I was also thinking when I was reading this about the magic and how, for example, they talked a lot about the Forged. And I loved this one part where he says I think it's in an epigraph or something, where it said that the Forged are not stupid, but they have no loyalty to one another, and they have no cooperation with one another.
Yeah.
And just sort of, but they're always in the moment. And
they're just empty.
They're empty, and they're kind of maybe, and there's also been some alluding to that they're thirsty to remember what that's like to feel. And we were just talking about trauma kind of freezing your ability to feel things and numb you, and that you to let in the love and the joy, you have to kind of let in the pain too. And so I just thought about the Forged, and then the Wit kind of being different in the sense that they are very Pack is loyal and cooperative, and just looking at those two things. And of course the Skilled is another layer of complexity, but also just looking at the world even in an even broader sense, because where Fitz goes, he starts to realize, oh, not everybody feels like they're living this fulfilled life. Maybe I'm not the only one who's struggling. And also just seeing other complexities, like the way like we were talking about how Burrich treats Molly and how he treats Nettle, but also I just can't help but juxtapose that with the King's Circle and how Regal has manipulated the kingdoms by taking away, restricting trade, taxing
Regal
the hell out
sucks.
of people,
Yeah.
and making everybody poor, and then raising commerce and money through this disgusting entertainment with the Forged. So he's creating profit, and therefore he's sort of creating a reward system off this grotesque, inhumane sort of sport. And so you're sort of being conditioned in different ways and so anyway, I'm rambling, but I just think it's interesting to look at all these macro perspectives of what's happening in the world that are sort of connected also to all of these little intricate details that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
I don't want, if I can ask, I don't want to take us
Obviously,
away
I was
from
reading
Farseer,
Silly.
but I just wanted to say, or I just wanted to ask for those people who have read farther along into the realm of the Elderlings, do we get more of the Forged? Do we find out more as to what happened, more background on like the Raiders and all that? Is that live ship? Like, where do we, because like the I want to like explore the Forged and what the hell happened, and more of that backstory, right? Do we get more of that? Or is it just kind of like this mystical kind of like, we kind of know what happened, but like we don't really explore it deeply?
I will say it's part of the
world.
It's definitely part of the entire tapestry. You put it that way. So things, you'll just keep going.
Read and find out.
But Assassin's Quest on reread is, pretty much. Reread, the value of Assassin's Quest on reread is through the roof. Through the roof.
Oh, I bet.
On reread, Assassin's Apprentice improves. Royal Assassin, not so much. That one's pretty much all in your face from the very beginning. But Assassin's Quest, the depth in that book that you will gain if you go back and revisit it's off the chart. Of all the books, the one that you will gain the most on a reread once you've finished is enormous. Just off the chart, enormous, as far as what it was telling you about the overall story and the beginnings of so many things. And to be able to read that story and what we gained from it on that first read, and to come to it later and there's more, that's insane. But there really is. It's been just... Hobb blows my mind. She really does. I mean, the last book was written 20 years after the first book, and she's still weaving threads through things that she put into those first books in the last one. And the talent that takes is insane.
Yeah.
I don't know how she does it. It's interesting because at the end of Assassin's Quest, you do get an epigraph or something that talks about the Outlanders and the Raiders, and how it seems to me like you're getting a glimpse of how they have been affected by the skill or by the Elderlings in the past, and how they were wronged by them, and they created the Forged, I think, in response to that, and then they create the Elderlings in response to that. And so, as much as I know we can look at Regal kind of being more of a mustache trolling villain, it seems like she's also creating some real shades of gray in the world. That's my prediction, is that we're going to get some shades of gray in the world. But don't tell me anything. I don't know.
I've been practicing my poker face.
I don't know.
You handled that very well.
Cool. Any last thoughts? Anybody wants to share about the book?
So I've seen people say that they felt like the ending was rushed, and some people were disappointed with where the Raiders kind of end up. Did any of you feel that way of the people who have just read it? Because to me, I don't necessarily feel strongly one way or the other. I didn't necessarily care about all of that. I more so cared just about Fitz. So I'm kind of curious what you guys thought.
I kind of did care about all that stuff, and I don't think it was rushed. I thought it was handled pretty well, but it just makes me wonder. I see people in the comments like, I just want to read Tawny Man now. Like, yeah, I want to read more of it. I need more of it. But yeah, it begs the question. And for me, I just kind of want to see where everything ends up. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. It was definitely something I noticed, like very apparently, that there just wasn't as big of a part of the ending as you would have thought it would have been. And definitely made me want to keep reading that. And the fact that Fool at the end kind of flees. I was curious about that too. So.
Yeah.
It's like, where's he going?
I liked
leaves
it.
stuff open.
I didn't think it was rushed to me. I felt like it did leave a lot of open possibilities for the world, and Verity as a dragon, and Kettle even, and what's gonna happen with her baby, that kind of thing. And Madison, I am the worst when it comes to pronouncing everything, so that's probably directed at me. But anyway.
No, I think that the criticism of the ending is valid to some degree. It does kind of close in a rush, but it was also believable that would be how it fell out. And because we're getting it from Fitz's perspective, and Fitz doesn't go to the coast, we're not going to see how that ends on the coast. We're going to get his ending. So I've got a couple of things I'd love you all to sort of expand, if you would. And one of them is, what did you all think of Nighteyes' time away with the wolves, and how you felt Fitz dealt with Regal at the end? Those are and thoughts I would be interested in hearing.
I have thoughts about the time that Nighteyes spends away, and I remember making a couple notes, thinking that I kind of like that. Like, I hear a lot of criticisms about this part, but to me, it was kind of realistic, and to me, I kind of wonder how that didn't happen earlier, to be honest with you. But when it happened, I was kind of excited for Nighteyes. I was kind of heartbroken because I was like, this might be it. Like, you know what I mean? And yeah, maybe in later books or later in Fitz's life, they reconnect, but I thought that might be it. And if it was it, that may have been a very special kind of moment, and it could have just been the right way to part, but I didn't want that to happen, obviously. So I was like, I don't know. I can see people's criticisms, wondering why that had to be part of the story. But to me, I thought it just added a little more color to the relationship, a little more realism to the fact that Nighteyes is a wolf. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the wit is strong, but he's a wild animal, and there's always going to be this kind of pull, and I'm glad he got to explore that. I was kind of excited about that, to be honest. Yeah.
I agree with everything you said. I would also say that this book had the most, I feel like the most time spent with Nighteyes when he was with Fitz, and I thought that was like one of my favorite parts of Assassin's Quest, was that you really got to see Nighteyes more.
Yeah.
I love Nighteyes so much. And I was sad when he went away with his pack, with his with the other wolves. But at the same time, I appreciated that time because, one, I think it kind of helped to see Fitz on his own for a little bit, but two, Nighteyes was always waiting around for Fitz. It's like, go wait at the edge of the city for me. And it just seemed to give Nighteyes a little more agency. And so I appreciated that.
And I think the bond that they'll continue to have is just all that much stronger because of that opportunity. If you love it, let it go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
builds trust.
Yeah, for sure. But on the Regal ending, that's kind of interesting because I remember I remember thinking, like I think it was. I guess we can spoil the ending. This is a spoiler talk, right? So
Yeah,
like
we're in spoilers.
with Regal, I thought it was. I was conflicted on that, Derry. To be honest with you, I love the ending as a whole, but the Regal part of it, I kind of liked that. But I also can understand how people might think it was a little silly and a little bit like, oh, that's how it plays out, you know. I don't know. I was conflicted on that. To me, it fit and it was okay. But it was a little. I don't know. When I read it, I was a little bit confused as to if I think that should have happened. But the more I sit on it, it's fine by me. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'd say my immediate reaction was just like that came out of nowhere and seemed super,
Yeah, like what?
just happened super quick.
Yeah,
And was like anticlimactic almost. But I feel
a little bit. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but I feel like sitting with it, as I mentioned earlier, I love the fact that with the ferret and Chade and all of that hidden into it was really great. But I do think at the initial reaction of reading it, I was like, well,
I think that's what I felt.
expected.
I think the build up and this villain that Regal is, I thought that it was handled a little quick and it was a little anticlimactic, but I loved kind of what happened. You know what I mean? I'm like, screw Regal, right? But,
little Joe Abercrombie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was
He deserved it.
Because for me, that was, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
For me, it was a callback to the, and we touched on it in Royal Assassin, the removal of agency that we saw Galen impose on the coterie, where they were forced into that loyalty to Regal.
Yeah.
And how Galen had been forced into loyalty to chivalry. They're imposing that loyalty again on Regal for Kettricken and her unborn child. There was an odd sense of justice to it at the same time as it being a punishment, because the same way that Galen knew he didn't actually feel that way but couldn't express it. And the coterie didn't genuinely feel that way but couldn't express it. The punishment of that for Regal, who was so selfish and so up his own bottom, that having to behave will have been a punishment. So the justice of it for me is quite a nasty justice, and I really like it for nastiness as well as it benefiting the crown. And I loved it. And Little Ferret, absolutely my hero.
Yeah.
When Alex made me think of when he was talking about being able to see more of Nighteyes in this book, was the moment that Fall meets Nighteyes within Fitz's skill connection. And he has this moment of this great heart, this warrior is Nighteyes.
That was cool.
And Nighteyes is like, you thought I was a slaughtering dog. I loved that moment of connection.
I love
it. It was just magic.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. Derry, did you freeze? Are you there? Okay. It seemed like you were freezing a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I actually, as far as that decision, it was unexpected to me personally, because I know, I mean, the whole book, you feel how strongly Fitz wants to kill Regal. And it's interesting too, because I know there was actually a scene where Verity commands Fitz to kill Regal, but he says, but not for you. You try to do that for your own basic selfish motivations before. And it made me very upset, basically, when Verity called him to him, said, come to me. But he said, you're doing this time for the Six Duchies. And so I think I wonder if that maybe shifted something in Fitz to hear that. And maybe, but I do think that there was in the end, he didn't end up killing Regal. And I could see how that would maybe be a little unsatisfying for people who maybe kind of just wanted Fitz to get out that rage or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think you're right that there was kind of an interesting sense of justice to that. I never thought about that before, Derry. That's a really cool insight about
Mhm.
just thinking back to Galen and how he won loyalty for the coterie
Yep.
versus how Fitz
Yeah.
does that to Regal. That's really
Yeah, it was
cool.
fitting.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, yay! I think we've done it. Is there anything else anybody wants to share?
I'm excited to keep reading, to be
Me
honest.
too.
Like all the hype for the rest of the books, and just
Yeah,
does
so-
anybody have, Alex, I know, are you planning to jump right into live ship after this? Like, what's your plan?
I'm planning on reading Ship of Magic
Yeah.
in July. I don't know if how quickly I'm going to read all 3 of those, but honestly, I'm the type of reader that I've grown up, as I was saying earlier, binging series. So I'll probably read them relatively consistently.
Mhm.
But just because I want to know what happens.
Yeah.
Too addicting.
Yeah.
I
me too.
promised Alan I would read Warlord Chronicles.
Oh, you got it. You have
I
to.
still need to read that. I want to read that too.
It is very
That's
good.
gonna be
My
next
favorite.
series
Yeah, it's so good.
to start, but
Yeah.
I do want to get to them. Eventually I will. You know, it's going to be hard to stay away from Hobb. So fantastic.
I'll be here when you do.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone in the chat. Thank you to my wonderful
What about you,
guests.
Theo? Are you going to move straight on into live ship?
Oh yeah.
You know, I want to. I've committed to a lot of books and read-alongs and stuff, and the more I defer it, the more I realize, I'm kind of just savoring it, and I'm kind of just building up the hype in my head. But I think I'm going to fit it in sooner than later. It might not be July, but maybe August.
Yeah.
I have to. It's just the hype. Madison's going crazy about live shit. Like, everybody's just nuts about it, and I can't let Alex, continue on without me. So, yeah.
You gotta read it with me.
Yeah.
Hey.
I think I am going to have to put it off for a little while. We'll see how
Mhm.
far I can put it off, but I don't feel like worried about it either.
No,
Part of
I-
me
yeah.
feels sad because I know I'm going to be seeing you guys all enjoying it and talking about it. And it'll probably get to me a little bit. I'll probably have some FOMO, but at the same time, I don't have FOMO because I don't have any fear. I'm not going to get to it.
It'll always be there, and it's always going to be
exactly.
good.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
okay.
Because
Yeah.
I just
Right?
know I'm going to get to it. Like I know, it's going to happen. Like
Yeah. And you can
it's not
only read
even
it first
scary.
once, right?
Yeah.
So
Very
That's
true.
true.
Soak it up.
That's
Yeah.
true. But I like what Alex said in his
Yeah.
PDR today, because I'm the same way. I love nautical settings. And I love that we've even got a touch of the nautical in Farseer. And I love multi POV as well. As much as I loved Fitz, I also love multi POV. So
Yeah.
I'm also super
I'm-
excited.
that's one thing I'm excited for, is kind of the drastic change of narrative and kind of writing style, and a little more of a glimpse into what makes Robin Hobb such a master, right? That'll be, because I heard she handles everything perfectly, and that'll be a huge contrast to the Farseer. So that'll be cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the books do allow for step away after each little
Yeah.
series. And there are gaps in time
Perfect.
in the book. I mean, there are 7 years between the end of Farseer and the beginning of Live Ships. So when taking a break away from the
I didn't
books,
know that.
it doesn't actually feel, when you come back to them, that you've been gone too long, because it has
Right.
been a long time. And it feels fine to take that big break. And so, yeah, it does allow for that.
That's
that
good to
stepping
know.
away.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. What a beautiful series. I feel like I love this book
Nothing
even more
following
now
me.
after talking
Yeah.
about it.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
me too.
Yeah.
Like I do. There's just so much to it. And I like I said, I can only imagine. I think Derry, and Jimmy, I just love hearing your insights as people who've read on in the series. And it's just so
Yeah.
fun to hear Alex and Theo, to hear your thoughts too as first time readers. So
Yeah.
but I can only imagine just what you can get on a reread with Hobb. Because like I said, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
feel
I
like
agree.
she's sort of planting so many things like at a micro level and macro level, and they're all interconnected. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Like just seeing, and I'm excited to read on. Thank you, everybody in the chat. this was such a fun, lively discussion. I'm so glad you're all here. And thanks again to my wonderful guests. I had a wonderful time with you all.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. All right.
More
And
than
we're
welcome.
going to go
Thank you
ahead
for the
and
invite.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Anytime. Anytime. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and hope you all have a great evening. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.